A common complaint, frustration, and challenge a lot of dungeon masters have is trying to make their combat more interesting, more layered, more compelling. Something more than, after we roll initiative, my players just run up to the thing they want to attack until it eventually dies, and then they move on to the next thing. And there's such little movement and fluidity to combat. What's going on, and how do we make this better? I'm going to share some good news about the new player's handbook that allows us to have more out of that combat. And then I'm going to actually share 10 tips and things that us as dungeon masters need to do to kind of keep up with these expectations and what is being laid out in this player's handbook. Welcome, my name is Dan from MacLeod D&D, and in this video I'm going to be covering a new concept that we can lean into a bit more with this new player's handbook, and then some tips and some abilities that we should be leaning into as DMs in this new age of Dungeons & Dragons in 2024. So, let's get into it. This new theme, this concept, something that I'm seeing just as a thread running straight through almost every single class, is this new opportunity for our players to have more movement within combat. I don't know if you're reading this book, I don't know if you're seeing this trend too, but it's something that is just sticking out to me like crazy. And so I'm going to highlight a lot of the new abilities and the ways that our characters can actually avoid attacks of opportunity through movement. This does not include boosted movement or allowing allies to move on your turn, simply moving without provoking attacks of opportunity. Here's the list of some things that I've clocked. The Barbarian Path of the Wilds can do this. The Bard College of Dance can get themselves and an ally to move without provoking attacks of opportunity. The College of Glamour gets Mantle of Inspiration, allowing allies to be able to move without provoking attacks of opportunity. The Cleric Trickster domain can move through their duplicate, allowing them to move without provoking attacks of opportunity. The Druid gets the Panther, the Tiger, and the Owl as they transform. All of them can move without provoking attacks of opportunity. And then the Moon Druid eventually gets Moonlight Step, even in their animal form, allowing them to teleport. The Fighter gets an ability called Tactical Shift, where they can take no attacks of opportunity after they use Second Wind, and then the Champion can also take no attacks of opportunity after they crit. The Eldritch Knight can teleport when they action surge. Monks can now disengage as a bonus action or use a focus point to both disengage and dodge. That disengage for them by itself does not cost a focus point. They can just disengage now as a bonus action. The Oath of Vengeance Paladin can move when they make an attack of opportunity and then not take any themselves. The Ranger gets free Misty Step at higher levels, and then the Rogue gets disengage as a bonus action. Other than some spells that the Wizards and the Sorcerers and the Warlocks might get access to, they don't get any innate abilities, but any of their teleportation spells would also allow them to do this, so they're not ruled out as well. As you can tell, that is a very long list, and a lot more than we saw in the 2014 Player's Handbook. And so with all these options to be able to move without opportunity attacks, like I said before, not including ways that you can boost your movement speed, boost the movement speed of others, and allow allies to move on your turn, all of those, we DMs need to and should be ready for this. Our combat should be more dynamic, reflecting the use of these abilities, otherwise combat's going to stay the same, and our characters can have all these abilities to move that they're not going to be using. We need to set up opportunities for our players to be able to use these abilities. And so I'm just going to jump into next. I'm going to quick hit 10 different ways, elements of things we should be adding into our combat so then allow our players, or even make it necessary for them to move around more in combat. First, simple one, environmental hazards. Adding things like shifting environmental threats, collapsing ceilings, rising water, spreading fire, unstable terrain, anything that causes your player to need to move and reposition to avoid damage is going to be good, is going to make our characters feel like they are more beneficial in using more of their abilities if they find themselves needing to get out of the way of hazards like this and then using their abilities to do so. Next, area control spells or effects. So any enemy spells or abilities that create damage or restricting zones, if your players can anticipate the location of something like a fireball or a wall of fire, or any environmental effect that is going to be happening, anything like that they can anticipate is going to make them feel rewarded for moving out of the way. Next, a moving objective, something like an artifact that they need, a fleeing hostage, something that the party or even enemies are trying to reach, and so the players are trying to engage in combat while also moving to secure or protect that thing. Adding some type of element like that, an object that they need to get to in the midst of combat, is going to be rewarding as well. Next is any form of like reinforcement or spawn points of enemies. If your players can anticipate where more threats will be coming from, some of your characters are going to want to run to that spot to clog it up to prevent those new coming enemies to get into their combat zone, or then that also allows your more squishier characters and the ones who don't want to be in the way of that danger to then get out of the way in the midst of combat too. So as you're seeing, we're going to want our characters to be able to anticipate upcoming things in the combat and prepare accordingly, strategizing and moving to get where they want to be. Fifth, elevation changes. Any type of multi-level terrains, cliffs, balconies, ledges, anywhere where enemies can gain combat advantages from being on the high ground, or where our characters may want to climb, jump, or descend to engage in that way. Any type of multi-layering will be good. A couple of those classes also get some climb speeds and fly speeds, and so we're going to want to create opportunities for them to want to use that, to see, oh, it's actually more beneficial if I get there. Next, shifting battleground, creating some type of battlefield that physically moves, so combat on a crumbling bridge or a runaway cart, platforms over lava that are shifting every round. We want to make it essential for players players to keep moving so that they're risking falling or losing that position. Anything like that will be a really helpful dynamic to add into combat. Next, any form of timed event, some type of timed sensitive thing like a ticking bomb, some type of spell they know is going to go off by a certain point, a closing gate, some type of magical ritual in progress. Anything that they are splitting their attention from fighting and then trying to prevent, stop, or get away from a threat, like anything like that where they know maybe in the next 3 rounds this thing is going to happen, and so they want to make sure that they've accomplished something by that end of the round or gotten away from something by the end of that round. Next one, and this one's huge. I really see this as a high potential. The new Monsters Manual is not out yet. However, I bet that enemy mobility is also going to be a thing. If our characters are getting all of these abilities to move without provoking attacks of opportunity, I imagine Wizards knows that they needed to make monsters that also reflect that level of dynamic combat. And so if our players are doing it, I bet our monsters will too. And so if your monsters are constantly moving around the combat, that's going to help our players recognize they need to be moving around as well. And then next, obstacles and cover, including some type of natural or artificial cover, trees, pillars, walls, things that the enemies are using for protection, or also our players will need to use for protection. Those types of dynamics into our combat are going to make it more rewarding for our players moving from cover to cover as they're going around. And then lastly, some form of interactive environment, giving players a chance to interact with their surroundings, like pulling levers to trigger traps, collapsing walls onto enemies, or using water to extinguish fire-based threats. Anything that you can have as an element within that combat zone that if a player got to that point, they can now take their action to do something that interacts with the environment. That is going to reward movement. Yes, you could run straight to the threat and stick right there to them, or you can take this detour, go up, climb this ladder, and up above you can find this thing that you can then launch down onto the enemies. And maybe there's a couple of those up on that higher level, so that now we have a player moving across the top of the combat, interacting with the environment and doing something more than just swinging in the same spot. So I hope that list is helpful. I think that if you use any of those 10 within your combat, you're going to be creating opportunity for our players and our characters to use new abilities now in the new player's handbook, allowing them to then feel like they're using all of the things within their toolkit as we are now seeing the new player's handbook push towards more movement. If there are other ways you have been using movement in your combat, please share them here, write down a comment, and let us know what are some ways that we can be kind of keeping up with the player's handbook as it appears that we're going into a more mobile and more dynamic combat setting. As always, thanks for sticking around. Give us a like, give us a subscribe for more videos like this, and let me know what else you're interested in seeing out of this new player's handbook.